Good morning to this S&D press conference on this important plenary session where we will discuss the State of the Union speech by President Juncker. I give the floor to Gianni Pittella, our group president.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming here today. I think that the European political panorama that we're facing nowadays is slightly improved as compared to what we had after the Brexit referendum. We are reinventing ourselves, and European citizens undoubtedly now believe that union is better than no union. But that's the kind of thing that makes everybody drop off to sleep. And tomorrow, the speech that I make to Mr. Juncker is going to be very strong indeed. Now, yes, we are facing an improved situation. However, in order to deal with the serious problems that we're facing in Europe at the moment, we need to deal with issues relating to the social fabric of Europe itself. And we have to ensure that we can protect the major interests of the European Union whilst also combating big companies, for example, that don't pay their taxes. And I think that here, looking at examples such as the web giants and multinational companies and the fiscal scandals that we've had there, I think the European Commission is really out there on its own. It is the weaker side, and we're seeing that it's not as well protected. Now, a lot of proposals have been put to Mr. Juncker over the past few weeks, and that's something that we'll be talking about tomorrow. I asked Mr. Juncker, and I spoke to Mr. Timmermans yesterday as well, saying that we need to have clear words about the state of health of democracy in Europe, particularly here. I'm thinking about the situation in Hungary and Poland. Thinking about the demagogues and populists. I mean, when we're looking at defending European values, it's more than just money. Mr. Orban wants to be reimbursed for the wall he's built. Well, I have to say, I think that would be absolutely ridiculous if the European Union were to reimburse somebody for building this wall, this epic symbol of anti-solidarity. And the Council and Parliament in the past 2.5 years have done quite a lot of work, but often we've seen issues blocked at Council level. And one of the major points is the voting systems being used in the Council at the moment. That's something I'm going to speak to Mr. Juncker about, asking him to take action on that, because we've had a blocking minority on many important issues in the Council. So I think that that is the kind of thing that we need to be talking about tomorrow, as well as the topic of strengthening economic and fiscal governance. We are in favour of creating a finance ministry, a treasury, not just to be a guardian of public accounts, but really to be a ministry for growth and for work. A ministry with real fiscal capacity, with its own resources and budget, and with a cohesion policy which is better controlled and more effective. And then in addition to this, there's the issue of sustainability, of course, and for us that is a priority. Security, the fight against terrorism and immigration, these are also important, and they're something that I will be talking about tomorrow. On immigration, nobody can ignore the fact that Italy, Spain, Cyprus, Greece have been left alone to deal with the issue. And the Italian government has done very well to speak out and say that its generosity and the generosity of the Italian people is simply no longer capable of dealing with the flows of people claiming for asylum. Because, of course, at a certain point when all of the burden is placed on one country, then simply that the numbers don't add up any longer. And the government did well, and a little bit of solidarity did come, at least in terms of words. But should we stop paying attention to this issue just because fewer boats are coming now? Or should we be focusing on reducing the number of deaths? It's more important to reduce the number of deaths than it is to reduce the number of boats. I think that morally we've got a clear need here. We need to stand together, to have a clear way of governing flows of migrants with security measures in place as well, together with clear policies for legal channels for migration. Otherwise, you'll close one route and another will open elsewhere, because these flows will always come. These flows are being created by problems that exist now and will continue to exist. Here, we need to have an alliance for dignity for Africa, for development on the African continent. And of course, this isn't something we can do overnight, but it is something which might help us to resolve or improve the situations that are causing these flows in the first place. So, referring now to the Dublin Treaty, this is something I spoke about with Mr. Tusk yesterday on the telephone. In the next few meetings, I understand we're going to be talking about the reform of the Dublin Treaty, but it shouldn't be a fake reform. It needs to be a real reform. And us in the Socialist Group will never vote on a revised version of the Dublin Treaty which doesn't improve the problems that we've had so far in relation to placing all of the burden on just a few countries. Finally, just a couple of comments on the climate. Now, Trump, I think even Mr. Trump has to apply a little bit of common sense here and see what's going on in his country and in the world. It's incredibly important, of course, bearing in mind the dramatic weather events we've seen, that people do need solidarity, and we have to wake up to what's going on. And us in Europe need to be the main champions in the fight against climate change and in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. If you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Grazie, Gianni Pittella. Are there questions from your side? Yes, please.
Mr. Pittella, today the Parliament will discuss on stepping up cooperation with African countries, but on migration. But before dealing with African countries, I wonder whether you see a possibility for an arrangement with European countries like Hungary that do not cooperate even after the verdict by the European Court of Justice, and if possible, also a short commentary on the upcoming German elections. That is, whether you see a chance for Mr. Schulz and whether you would like Mr. Schäuble to remain finance minister after the elections.
On immigration, well, a lot's already been said, and on asylum seekers as well. Now, the number of asylum seekers, according to all of the information from the Commission, the number of asylum seekers going to Hungary hasn't yet reached 2,000. And they've gone, of course, to the Court of Justice. Well, there, of course, what happens at the Court of Justice happens at the Court of Justice. We'll have to wait and see. what Orban says, I have to say, it doesn't really bother me a huge amount. You can't not get a reaction, of course, and I hope that Tusk, with all of his diplomacy and all of his skills, can manage to convince Mr. Orban, as well as those other countries that are being insubordinate, that they can understand that this is something absolutely fundamental, and that in order to get the benefits of the European Union, you also have to meet the responsibilities that you have. And so I think with diplomacy, we should be able to convince people. If not, however, sanctions will of course be used to convince them, and a reduction of funds will be used. Now, with the German elections, we have to be very careful when we're looking at what the polls say. Polls often turn out to be wrong or turn out to be fake. Mr. Schulz, we all know the situation there, but my heart is full of hope, I would say. So I very much hope that Mr. Schulz will win. This issue of Mr. Schäuble, not because of his because of himself, but the political and economic management of the EU. Really, everything he's doing goes very much against what I would like to see happen.
Yes, on Turkey, I guess.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. Once again, the file on Turkey is on the agenda again. The Commission is going to issue a statement. So what is your position going to be during the course of that debate? Because you have already had positions in the past. But in Syria, we see that the European Union is absent. And following the war, the fight against the jihadists, what should be done? What should the European Union, what should the European Parliament be doing?
Well, on Turkey, you'll remember that our position is very clear. We've had resolutions, a rapporteur, of course, in the Parliament as well, has spoken out about this. We are in favour of suspending the negotiations. Blocking the negotiations, we believe, is a response to what Mr. Erdogan's doing. We don't want to block the negotiations. It's Mr. Erdogan that's forcing us to block the negotiations, because if somebody is in a country behaving in the way that Mr. Erdogan is behaving, compromising press freedom, putting people in prison without even telling them why they're putting them in prison. I mean, this is the kind of thing that's going on in Turkey at the moment. I've seen what's going on. I've seen what's going on in the courts, the way that the cases are being held, and it's absolutely scandalous. So I think when you're faced with this kind of authoritarian actions, you do need to move to sanctions and to blocking of negotiations. That doesn't, however, mean for us as socialists that we would remove the accession status of the country itself. Because we want to react to what's being done by Mr. Erdogan, but we want to be able to respond positively to the Turkish people. That Mr. Erdogan is one thing, the Turkish people is something different. If we were to remove this candidate status from Turkey, we'd be damaging the citizens themselves, and that's not what we want to do. With Syria, we all are aware of the difficulties that we're encountering over there. Ms. Mogherini is very committed to this. I think she will, she has spoken about this in the past, and she will speak about this again in the Parliament. Ms. Mogherini, I think, has an enormous respect for Parliament, and she's shown that because she has been here on various occasions to discuss this issue with MEPs.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Are there any further questions?
Thanks a lot, and have a good week.